So following the release of the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲 JRC videos, which you guys have supported tremendously, given us incredible viewing figures for which I'm extremely thankful for, we've decided to open the remit up into a bit of a Q&A, because I get a huge number of questions on social media, and I answer them all. I answer any question I get sent, but there is obviously a contingent of the carp angling populace that's avaricious for information. I totally get that, so we want to answer as much of it as we can and help you guys out with questions that you've got pertaining to your own angling, or questions you might have about my angling. So I've got here, this is just from the first draft, this is 3 pages of questions that have been sent into 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲 social media from you guys. Some have been sent in via the YouTube channel, some by Instagram, some by Facebook, but a huge uptake, a massive number of questions, nearly 60 questions just here. Obviously I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to pick some out, and the ones that we don't do now we'll try and get to on another session. So I'm going to work my way through them as best we can, and hopefully you'll find that one of the questions that you asked is one that gets answered, and if it's not, then hopefully you'll find something of interest in the questions and answers as we go through them. So the first one I'm going to kick off with is from 𝘃𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗲, and Sean sent this in from the YouTube channel. Sean asks, when fishing a weedy lake and you found a clear spot, how do you ensure your line lay is perfect between the weed beds and your rod? Great question, and is going to become very, very pertinent to fishing in the next few months with the weed coming up. Summer is ahead, and line lay is something which is of or should be of consideration to all carp anglers. It plays a big part in not only the amount of bites you get, but sometimes the amount of bites that you can land as well. Fishing 2 spots over weed is the key thing is that you want your line, as a carp angler, we want our lines to get down as low as possible, but obviously thick weed prevents that to a greater or lesser extent. The biggest problem comes when the weed comes almost to the surface or is on the surface and your line is held up all the way out to the spot, because then any kind of bird life, swans and so on, it's an absolute disaster waiting to happen. They come through, drag the rig potentially off the spot, and so on and so forth. Now, the only way to really get around that is by clearing a channel from your spot, and I use I think it was a company called Angling Intelligence. I'm not sure they're around anymore, but they made a very small little castable stainless steel weed rake. There's a few other companies, I've seen a few on the market now, because I lost mine at St Ives and I got a new one. I can't remember where it was from, but if you look around you can get small castable stainless steel weed rakes, and with that and a bit of graft you can clear a channel from your spot back to you that's enough to get, even if you get your line a foot down so it's out of the way of the bird life on the surface traversing backwards and forwards, then that will make your life a lot easier. If you haven't got access to a stainless steel weed rake for any reason, or if, let's say, you're in a situation where you need to clear a spot for line lay, then a really good Heath Robinson fixative or fixture that you can use is by taking an old-fashioned spod and placing sticks through it at all different, through the holes, jamming the sticks in it so it looks like a giant game of 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲, if any of you are old enough to remember that. Before you put the sticks in, put a couple of stones in the nose, and then put sticks at various cross angles through the holes so they're wedged in there, and it creates this big weighted porcupine, and that is really good at clearing weed channels, or clearing channels I should say, in the weed for your lines to sit in, and also to open up a little bit of a channel hopefully that you can be bringing fish through. So there are a couple of things that you can do. If you are fishing a long way out, and you know, sometimes, let's say your spot's like 80 yards out, you're not going to be clearing a channel all the way back into the bank. It would take days and days, and you would have a mountain of tonnage of herbage by your bivvy. So in situations where it's just not practical, then the only thing you can really do is fish with a heavy lead and fish dead tight to it, and fish with your rod tip down and try and compress the line down through the weed to get it down through the surface layers a bit. And that can be very effective if that's all you can do. In terms of line lay onto a spot, ideally, and again what I just said with the tight line is really to get around. If you can't rake a channel, it's the only option you're left with. Ideally, in terms of line lay, once I've got the rig into the spot, I like to hold the rod up high and let the tackle sink itself from the rig up to the wall of weed that's encompassing the spot, and then back to me. So having cast the rig out, if I then put the tip under the water and try and sink it in a traditional way until the two V's meet on the surface, then you're holding the line taut from the lead as it comes up off the spot onto the weed, and it will stay in that position as an angle cutting through the corner of your spot, which you really don't want. So if allowed, I'll be using lead core. If not, I'll be using leadless lead core. And if I can't use that, or I haven't got that, I'll be using tubing with bits of putty up the line. But whichever you opt for, I'm aiming to get it sunk down from the rig in a nice gentle curve up to the wall of weed, and then up it and along it. And the best way to do that is, as I said, once the lead's on the bottom, is to hold the rod up and just pay out a foot or so of line and encourage it to sink from the lead back towards you, and that will just let it bed down into the hole a bit more, rather than putting it under tension from the rod tip, which, as I said, will create a slanting angle which you don't really want. Because it's weedy, you don't want the fish to be going very far. I know I'm expanding off the topic a little bit, Sean, but you want to be fishing with a tight clutch, and you want quick indication of where a fish is going. So I don't fish a bowstring tight line, but I fish what I call a direct line, sunk back from the lead, and put my sensitivity on high, and walk backwards if you can when you hook the fish. Adam Douglas sent in these questions from YouTube. Thanks very much for these, Adam. It's a double barrel question, really. The first part being, how has parenthood impacted your fishing life? And the second question is, do you think having children at a younger age would have changed your outlook or approach in regards to your fishing? Two really good questions there, Adam, which I picked out because they're relevant to my current life and they reflect how my life's changed, and obviously a lot of people out there, yourself included, can relate to this. So how's parenthood impacted my fishing life? If you don't sense or make changes to your life after having children, then you're probably not quite as good a parent as you could be. Children always take priority and will have a massive impact on our lives in a really positive manner. There's nothing more vital and joy and life-giving than children, and nothing supersedes that, not even a 50-pound carp, you know. So having my son, or having our son, has impacted my fishing life in terms of, let's just think, I mean, I haven't fished abroad. I haven't done a week in France for about 6 years. So that's a big, you know, up until then, until River was born, I was doing at least one, maybe two French trips a year. And then I found that when he was born, I just didn't want to be away from home. You find that. I was talking to a lad on the syndicate I'm at now just the other day, and a lot of his fishing was days. And although he had the flexibility to do some nights, he just felt that when he was here, he just wanted to be at home with his family. And I totally get that. It can be very hard to be away, and how people coped in the olden times, as I call them to my son, when they didn't have FaceTime. No idea. Can you imagine just being away in Europe or in the army or something back in the days when communication was only by letter? Thank God nowadays we have FaceTime, and that makes life a bit more bearable. I think another big change, apart from not doing any more foreign fishing, I will do some more, but while he was really young, I didn't want to be away for that amount of time. But I think one of the other big changes that has impacted or caused is that now, if I go fishing and I've got the potential to do 2 nights or the potential to do 3 nights, if I'm not on fish and it doesn't look good, then I'll go home. Because although years ago I would have thought, well, you know, I've got this time, I'm going to expend it, and something might happen. Now I think, do you know what, I'll be much happier at home building a Lego set or doing something meaningful like that than sitting here on a whim and a hope and a prayer that something might happen. And conversely, that also gives me a bit of buyback for when it does look good, and then I can push it out a little bit and maybe stay an extra night. So it's a balancing act, and children do have a massive impact on it. And I've only got one, you know, I mean, some of you guys have got 2 or 3 or 4. It's very hard to balance, especially when you're away at work all week and you come home to the family at the weekend, and that's the only time you can really get to go fishing. And a lot of wives don't look too favourably on that, you know, because you've been away at work and then you're going away again. So I understand and appreciate it's very, very hard to get a balance. Some parents are lucky enough to go fishing with their kids, take their children, and that is a joyous, wonderful thing. River and I are going to definitely be doing some float fishing this year for some silvers and so on, and we'll probably do our first night together this year as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I think it's about making things balance, making them fit, give and take, remembering that family and children always have priority and come first, and enjoying it as you go with your children. And those moments away, although they can be hard, it's like when you go home, it's even more enriching. So when I'm packing up a dirty, muddy ground sheet, or and I'm loading the van, I'm thinking, I'm going home, I'm going actually to the best place, because I'm going to get that amazing welcome from my family, and that's actually the high point of it all. So yeah, it has a huge impact, but a positive one all round. And the second part of Adam's question, just to touch on that, do you think having children at a younger age would have changed your outlook or approach in regards to your fishing? Absolutely, definitely. I was a late comer, both literally and metaphorically. Didn't have river until I was 44, so my mid-40s. So it meant that I could selfishly waste all my formative years in the pursuance of carp and whatever else took my fancy, probably at a time when a lot of the 20-year-olds were having children and couldn't do it. So, you know, it's flipped round now, and I've done it late, but if I'd done it early, yeah, of course it would have not just changed my fishing, but it would have changed my life in totality. But it would also mean that river would be about 22 years old now, so I'd probably be doing more carp fishing instead of having it the other way around. This is a great question. This comes in from Daryl Clarkson via the YouTube channel. Daryl asks, have you ever felt pressured to keep your sponsors happy by saying you've caught using certain things? So this caught my eye just because I think there's a perception amongst the angling public that people lie about what they've used or what they've caught, and so on. And whilst I'm sure that does go on, there is nothing more important to me than my integrity and my honesty. And I've never said that I've caught a fish on something that I haven't to promote a product, or said that I've caught it on a particular bait that I haven't, because I mean, in actual fact, I can think of times where I've been on the phone to Joe, the editor of Carpology, and the editor of Total Carp, where they've pulled out a picture of me from an archive or something because they just wanted a picture to illustrate something, and they put it into an article, let's say about floater fishing, and that particular fish I caught, Joe wouldn't have known, but I caught that fish on a boilie at long range. So I know that somewhere in my writing history, I've probably used that fish for a long range article caught on a boilie, and if I haven't, I might do in the future. But now it's gone in an article for floater fishing. Now, if I'm in control of that, that's fine, because I know that would never happen, because I know exactly what I've caught on, and I would never say anything different. But I just mentioned that to show how fussy I am about what it was caught on, and so on. If I catch a fish on a tiger nut, I say it's caught on a tiger nut. You know, I'm not held by Sticky to account to say if you call it on a tiger nut, you have to say it's a 𝘁𝗶𝗶𝗀 or something. I wouldn't even get involved in that, and they wouldn't even ask me to do that, although it probably does go on in some sectors. My advice to anyone watching this who's trying to come through the echelons and get into carp fishing in terms of making a name for themselves or something is keep yourself clean. It's a small angling community that we live in, and people very, very quickly sniff out a wrong un. So your integrity and your honesty is paramount. So some absolutely brilliant questions you guys have sent in, and I've really enjoyed reading through them, and I'm quite excited by ploughing through all this material that you've given us to talk about. So thanks very much for that. The next great question is from Pete Jones. Pete sent this in via the YouTube channel, and it says, Pete says, when did you first sharpen your hooks? And was it a eureka moment, or did you go through a phase of using sharpened and unsharpened hooks? So my personal history with hook sharpness goes back a long, long way. And I would say the earliest that I can remember fastidiously checking hooks for sharpness was around about 1996 when I was working at Drennan, and ESP was a long way off. We'd started working on it, but the hooks that we were using then, Terry Hearn had just come on board, and he was using the Continental Boilie hook for his hinge stiff rig. It was the best hook for the rig at the time. In fact, it's the hook that I still use for a huge amount of my fishing today. There isn't a stronger hook. They sharpen amazingly well, and they're just so incredibly reliable. But so I still use them now. But back then, that was the hook that was used with the stiff hinge, and Terry was very fussy about the sharpness, and we used to talk about it, how the batches tend to vary a little bit. Terry was very into checking it on his nail, which, you know, some people like that. I think that actually your nails are something that change in texture quite a lot depending on your diet or depending on what you've been exposed to. You think, like, when you want to cut your nails, you've been in the bath, how soft they are. So your nails actually vary a lot. So it's not how I like to do it, but it is a test of sorts. But the point was that we realised that some hooks obviously were a lot sharper than others, and some would stick and some would skid on the nail. So I had access to a high-powered microscope in the office. I set it up, I made some jigs for the size 4 Continental, and on my lunch break I used to drop them into the jig, zone in on it, check the point. If it was really good, I put it to that side. If it was average or less, it would go back to this side, back in the box. And I would grade these hooks out, and I would get 100 or so and send them to Terry in the post. And I would get 20 or so because I wasn't fishing anywhere near as much, and I'd put those in my tackle box to use. So that was, yeah, nearly 30 years ago. That was a long time before hook sharpening came to the forefront, and although hook files were on the market and were available at the time, if you had said to me, make the hook sharper by taking a file to it, I would have sworn at you. I'd be like, you cannot do that's a finely made, Japanese designed and manufactured fishing hook using high carbon steel. It's made the way it is, it's the best it can be. A slightly blinkered view I'd have to accept now, but the thought of taking a file to a hook like that was complete anathema to us, so it wasn't done. And it wasn't until Jason Hayward opened everyone's eyes to what could be achieved with hook files, with diamond jewelers files at the time, that we realised that we'd all been missing a huge trick, a huge edge. I mean, Jason could have kept that to himself and it would have been an enormous edge. So fair play to him for telling us. But that was probably about 2005 or so. Jason started writing about sharpening hooks. It was around about then, and I knew Jason, I'd spoken to him a few times, and he'd shown what he could achieve with these jewellers files. Jason is a jeweller by trade, hand makes jewellery. And he'd been using these files to create incredibly fine, deadly hook points. And so seeing the potential in that, and obviously already realising how important a super sharp hook was, I think to argue otherwise would be foolish in the extreme. I used to send Jason a check. a load of hooks in an envelope, and he would very kindly send them back. Who remembers them? Checkbooks. And he would send them back maybe a few weeks later, a load of perfectly sharpened hooks, which was the next stage of my fascination and preoccupation with hook sharpness. So microscopes was mid-90s, then mid-2000, 2005, it was Jason sharpening hooks for me by hand. And then the next stage after that was when Jag brought out their sharpening kits, and that changed the game again. They did it in conjunction with Jason. We all got the kits and started having a go ourselves. And my next phase of sharpening development, if you'd like to call that, Pete, was using the hook sharpening kits myself and creating hook points, which I was reasonably happy with. Thought I could do quite a good job after a bit of practice. And that was probably through 2009, maybe, when Jag bought them out, 9 or 10, through to about 2012. And then the final phase came into being, which was when I went out fishing with Jim Shelley. And Jim's, love him or hate him, he's got a very shrewd mind for a lot of things, and Jim knew, or thought he knew, how to make the hook sharper and better than what had preceded it. And he had a style which not only sharpened the tip of the hook, as Jason had done, but removed a huge amount of metal from the point section between the tip and just below the barb, just above the bend. The idea being that it created a much thinner section in lower diameter, so that it wasn't just about sharpness, it was about penetrative sharpness, how far the whole point section will go in relative to the pressure that was being put on it. As soon as Jim showed me that, that was the final eureka moment, I guess. And for the last 7 years, that's how I've done it myself, using the style that Jim showed me, and that's how I do it. Watch the hook sharpening video that was part of the rig section that we did before in this Carpology JRC series, and you'll see how I do it. Probably taking a third of the metal off, and again thinning out that whole point section, because whilst everybody, or almost everybody, is preoccupied with sticky sharpness, that is only one part of the picture. Yes, it needs to be sticky sharp on the end, but if you've got a really thick shoulder of metal behind that sticky sharp bit, it's not going to go in under light pressure. It's going to stop when it hits that shoulder of metal. If you thin that out, not round the bend, never take metal off the bend, but if you thin that out down past the barb, then there's no shoulder of metal to hit. The sticky part will catch and the rest of it will slide in really easily. So there were my succession of eureka moments, the evolution of my fascination with hook sharpening, Pete. Hope you found it interesting. All the best, mate. So we've got a bait question now, and this comes in from 6 String Scott via Instagram. Thanks for this, Scott. Scott asks, I wanted to ask you a little more info about the Bailey's Manila condensed milk combination. I wanted to know if you made up a stick mix, for example, with crumb and these 3 liquids, how would or could you store them, and for how long would it last? Will this have shelf life qualities, or will it go off due to the condensed milk? Okay, I wanted to cover this because I've had a lot of social media questions about this myself. The first most important thing that I just wanted to get across to you guys is that when you're using the Bailey's and condensed milk combination into that crumb and ground bait, keep your liquids lean. It's really important. It's so easy to put in too much liquid and end up with a really wet, stodgy mix that will just sit as a lump of congealed bait mass on the bottom, which is not what you want. You want just enough liquid in there so that it's light and feathery, it's fully dispersed. If you give it a light squeeze, it will bind, but when it's in the water, it will gently fizz and release the attractors and then break down to powder. So it's very important that you do not overdo those liquids. Add them just a small amount at a time. Work them through with the spoon and make sure it's thoroughly dispersed throughout the entire bucket or whatever you're using as a receptacle for the bait, and then leave it for a short while, you know, and let it soak in, then come back to it and stir in a bit more. Do not oversaturate it because you'll ruin the mix. In terms of answering Scott's question, if we've made it up. Now, in a bucket, if it's kept cool, that will probably last for about 2 to 3 weeks if it's not damp and it's fully mixed in properly. 3 weeks probably at the outside. It freezes really, really well. So if you haven't used it, you can bag it up and put it in the freezer. There's no problem at all with doing that. But generally, if you keep it dry, if you have got it in a bucket and you want to keep it longer, you sometimes find that around the outer edges and in the corners of the bucket, that's where the mold will begin. So if you've got it in a bucket and you're looking at storing it beyond a couple of weeks, tip it into a grip seal bag or a polythene bag, get the air out of it and put a knot in it, and we'll keep like that for more than a month. So hope that helps. If it looks right, if it smells all right, it's not mouldy, don't feel you need to throw it away. This question comes in from Ben Cook via our YouTube channel. Ben asks, I've just joined a syndicate that allows braided mainline but has a ban on leaders. The water is incredibly weedy, so I would like to use braid. What can I do to help cushion the impact when playing fish without using a mono or fluorocarbon leader? This is a question a lot of people ask me. If you haven't used braid, then the whole concept of it can be a bit frightening. And sometimes when you're playing a fish on braid, it is flipping frightening. But I don't think there's as much to be afraid of as people think. I've used braid for the majority of my fishing now for many years, and I've used it exclusively for the last 3 years, I think, virtually exclusively anyway. And during that period of time, I haven't used a leader at all. I've used braid straight through to the leg core, and that's it. Fortunately, touch wood, there's loads of it here, lovely. Smells of pine fresh wood chip. Fortunately, I don't suffer or tend to suffer with fish losses due to hook pulls. So I think that if you've got a well set clutch and you're using a good quality hook, again, hooks are very, very important. The hooks I always use tend to be short shank, wide-ish gape, and with a beaked in turn point. And I believe that you just get less failures on those sort of hooks. But believe me, I mean, most of my fishing is for very big fish, quite often in weedy environments, and I use braid without a mono or fluoro leader. If I thought it was costing me even one fish a year, I'd be making changes. So I would say, don't worry about it, crack on. Fish in the weed, Ben, as you want to use braid. Absolutely the best thing to use in thick weed is braid. There is nothing comes close to it with dealing with fish, landing fish, getting rigs well positioned, etc, etc. Braid is the ultimate in thick weed, so you're right to make that decision to get on it. Do not worry about using a mono leader at all. Just play your fish carefully, make sure your clutch is set properly, and you'll be fine. This is a great question. It's one that it tends to come up quite a lot. 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗲 has asked via Facebook, if you had to stick to one bait for carp fishing for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? So Simon's asking me to choose a bait which would be the most adaptable to the huge range of angling situations that you might be faced with. Can it deal with crayfish? Can you cast it long range if need be? Can you break it up and create other baiting scenarios with it? Is it going to deter bream? Does it work all year round? I think there's only, can you leave it out attached to the hook all night without it falling off? You know, there's loads and loads of questions, and I think there's only one bait to my mind that fulfills all of those possible criteria, and yet at the same time is incredibly attractive to carp. So no compromise on that. A bait that catches loads of fish from any kind of water that I've ever used it on. A bait that you can use all year round, and as I said, faced with any of the aforementioned scenarios, it's going to cope. The answer has to be, Simon, a tiger nut. It gives you so many options. Works superbly as a single. You can dry them off and put them in little bags. You can put them through the food blender and turn them into tiny pieces of nutty ground bait. You can do anything with tiger nuts. They'll sit on the bottom for as long as you need them to, till a carp comes along. there's nothing that you can pop them up. There's nothing that a tiger nut can't do for you. And as I said, we haven't compromised in the most important area, which is, do carp like them? Yes, they adore them. Every single box perfectly ticked. So whilst I don't use them for all my fishing, because sometimes I do prefer to give them boilies, at certain times boilies can be more effective. If you limit it to one bait that will cover everything for as much of a time period and eventualities as you could possibly cover, it has to be a tiger nut. This question comes from OJR Carp Fishing on Instagram. And OJR asks, do you tackle waters of 2 acres or less any differently to other waters? As I feel like every move I make, the fish know I'm there. I feel your pain, OJR. It's something that I've said a lot before in the past. There is nothing harder than a really small carp lake, especially when it's got a low density of population and the fish are big. As soon as that gate goes, as soon as the first splash of a lead goes in, they know the game is afoot. It's almost like as soon as you pull through the car park 200 yards away, they know the game is afoot. Fish in tiny lakes are intimately acquainted with their immediate surroundings, and that is what makes them so hard to catch. As soon as they are being fished for, they know, and the shutters will come down to a greater or a lesser extent, and they can become very hard to catch. Fish in really small lakes can be and are usually much harder to catch than fish that live in 100 acres, because on big lakes, if you find the fish, usually they're not feeling too anxious or pressured. You can set up near them, and if you find them, they can usually be quite catchable. The situation on small lakes couldn't be more different in terms of as soon as, even just, you feel like sometimes as soon as you're putting your bank sticks in, they know, and the situation changes. So if you've only got short sessions, you need to be extremely careful. In fact, whatever the length of session is, but I'm thinking of some lakes I can think of in the past that have been small lakes that are low stocked, where you are just lowering in one rig off the rod tip and then you're sitting back 20 yards away over a tiny scattering of bait, and you're just, because any disturbance can put the fish on edge, can scare them off. So I feel your pain. You're up against it on small lakes. What do I do? If there's no weed, then I absolutely ditch. If you've got no weed and no features, I'm not particularly interested in features. I'm not a features driven carp angler. The feature to me that predetermines where I fish every time is the carp themselves. Not really that interested in features. I like small, hard, clean spots, but undulations and so on, I'm not interested in the depth or measuring it. I just want to fish where the carp are. So in terms of if you've got a lake that is small and there isn't any weed and there's not really any features, I would just get fishing. By that I would ditch the marker sticks, the wrapping sticks, I would be ditching the marker rod, I'd be ditching the spawn rod, and I would just probably fish with just a boilie on the bottom, 1 ounce lead, put it out there, 3 boilies round it, and I'm fishing. Less is more, it really is. And again, things like fluorocarbon lines can help you, because you can get them down lower in the water, out of the way of the fish. They will be so aware of what is in there, any intrusion into their environment. If you're fishing a very small lake that is full of weed, then that's a slightly different ball game, because obviously you need to know that you're fishing effectively on a clear spot. If you are trying to find spots during a short session in thick weed on a small lake, you're just creating a mountain for yourself, really. So if you're faced with that kind of lake, I would say absolutely make the most of your time by taking an afternoon off work, or going down in an evening or a Saturday afternoon with a bare lead and some braid, and finding where those clear areas for drops are, where it just drops, you can feel it hit the bottom and then it slides before it looks up in weed. Put them in your diary, wrap them out, mark them up, make note of them, and then fish those spots in whichever area of the lake that you find the carp in, as carefully and discreetly as you can. It's all about stealth, and it's more about a few boilies and a catapult, or even putting them in by hand, than it is about a spawn and marker floats. You don't need any of that stuff, and they really can put the fish on edge and make things work against you. So if you can, keep it as simple as you can, and stealth absolutely is your number one friend. Walking into a peg, as I see so many times, people turn up, walk into a peg, nice bright t-shirt on, stand at the front, scratch their balls, have a vape, ring, John, how many wraps do that? You know, forget all that. You will not catch anything like what you want to catch out of small intimate lakes if you've got that kind of attitude. You can't be too careful. Give the carp maximum respect. Most people don't respect the carp. They think that they will just put up with whatever disturbance or noise the angler is willing to do. Malleting in bank sticks, spomming for an hour. You know what I mean? The more you mug the carp off, the more they'll mug you off. Treat the fish with respect, play a stealthy game, think about your fishing, and use those to your advantage when fishing all lakes, but particularly very, very small intimate venues, which are the hardest of all. So this question comes in from Danny Dorr via the YouTube channel. Danny asks, how do you fish day ticket lakes that are always busy, have no features, and there are only 2 pegs left when you arrive? So first of all, maybe you should try getting out of bed a bit earlier, Danny. I'm only joking, mate. You know, real life is always difficult. Perhaps Danny's doing the school run, as I often have to do, and sometimes you just can't get there early, and by the time you get there, there are only 2 pegs left. If you can get there early, I mean, if you've got the ability to get to a lake earlier and you're choosing not to because you want to have a lie-in, then obviously, not you, Danny, but anyone who's got that mindset, don't complain. You know, who wants it the most will get it the most. Something my wife tells me. But the thing is, if there's only 2 pegs that are left when you get there, you then have to make the most of them. The great thing is that on really busy lakes, there can't constantly be people arriving. People are also leaving. Because that is the nature of busy lake. People come and go. So always be on the lookout for opportunities. If you see fish showing an area that is stitched up, don't necessarily be disheartened. You may find that one of those guys is going home in an hour's time. So keep your wits about you. What I would say is that from April through to November, the fish on a lot of lakes will be quite mobile. So although you may not be able to turn up and get bang flush on the fish, which is probably the case if a lot of the lake is taken, you will find that the fish are just more mobile and covering more of the lake. So it is quite likely that at some point during the day they might pass through a reasonable area if you can get into it, if it is one of those 2 remaining swims. Try and think about fishing differently. If you're going to just put out a marker float and spom a load of bait out at 50 yards in a line with everybody else in all those other swims, then you're probably not really stacking it in your favour. So what about putting a few grains of corn under that bush, or 3 boilies under there? Because very often the carp will come very close on day ticket lakes. On lakes like that, the fish tend to get accustomed to noise and disturbance, and sometimes to escape the deluge of spods and markers and spoms and everything out there, they will come in very, very close to the bank, and very often the angler who just sits back, even on a busy lake, and just puts 2 rods in close with a light bit of bait can be the one who will score. Again, it's about trying to make things different so that if fish do, I mean, what we're trying to do here essentially is make the best of a bad situation. By fishing out of the box a little bit, looking for opportunities, fishing unusual spots, using small amounts of bait, we can hopefully start to load things into our advantage. But it's never going to be ideal, Danny, so if you can, try and get there before other people, but you'll never beat all of them. Trust me, I know it can be very, very hard, but always remember, like I said, people are leaving just as much as they are arriving very often. So one thing that can be really worthwhile is, if you're not living too far from the venue, go down for a walk around the evening before. Not only may you see some fish and be able to work out what area of the lake they're in, but by talking to a couple of anglers, you'll get an idea of who's leaving and who's staying, which can really help you plan the day for the following day when you arrive. So hope that's given you a little bit to think about. You can use some of the things I've said to maximise your chances, but busy lakes are hard work for all of us. But keep at it, keep your eyes open and keep your wits about you. Okay, thanks very much for watching, guys. Really appreciate the questions, some really good, honest questions there, and hope you enjoyed listening to the answers. Don't be disheartened if I haven't read yours out. I will try and get to a lot more of these on future presentations. If you've got questions that you would like me to answer, drop them in the comments below with your name, and we will do our very best to answer the best ones on a future video. So again, thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you next time.